Opportunities in the Marketplace by Victor Yup and Doris Mock. Chapter 11. Mephibosheth. Love over lies. 2 Samuel chapter 19 verses 24 to 30. Here is one of the most beloved brotherhood stories, also recounted in the Book of Virtues by William Bennett. Horror gripped the heart of the World War I soldier as he saw his lifelong friend fall in battle. Caught in a trench with continuous gunfire whizzing over his head, the soldier asked his lieutenant if he might go out into the no-man's land between the trenches to bring his fallen comrade back. "You can go," said the lieutenant, "but I don't know it will be worth it. Your friend is probably dead, and you may throw your life away." The lieutenant's advice didn't matter, and the soldier went anyway. Miraculously, he managed to reach his friend, hoist him onto his shoulder, and bring him back to their company's trench. As the two of them tumbled in together to the bottom of the trench, the officer checked the wounded soldier and then looked kindly at his friend. "I told you it wouldn't be worth it," he said. "Your friend is dead, and you are mortally wounded." "It was worth it, though, sir," said the soldier. "What do you mean, worth it?" responded the lieutenant. "Your friend is dead." "Yes, sir," the private answered. "But it was worth it because when I got to him, he was still alive, and I had the satisfaction of hearing him saying, 'Jim, I knew you would come.'" One of the greatest stories of brotherhood is that of David and Jonathan. 3 times the Bible recorded that Jonathan loved David as his own soul. 1 Samuel 18:1, 3, and 20 verse 17. Jonathan was not the only child of Saul to love David. Michal, the daughter of Saul and the wife of David's wife, loved David. 1 Samuel 18:20 as well. So David owed Saul's children a lot, especially Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. Out of kindness for Jonathan, David restored all the family land to Mephibosheth and invited him to eat at his table continually. 2 Samuel 9 verse 7, and charged Ziba, Saul's servant, to till the land for him. 2 Samuel 9 verse 10. At David's second exile at old age, however, Ziba deceived the disoriented David into giving him all that belonged to Mephibosheth by saying that Mephibosheth was glad the kingdom of his father Saul was restored. 2 Samuel 16, 3-4. Have you been depicted and portrayed as heartless and hostile like Mephibosheth was? Have you been deceived, denied, and deprived of what you rightly owned? How do you remove a barrier, return a favor, reduce a tension, rebuild a trust, and restore a relationship? First, rebuild the future. 2 Samuel chapter 19 verse 24. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. President Eisenhower once admitted to the National Press Club audience that he was not a great speaker. He once said, "It reminds me of my boyhood days on a Kansas farm. An old farmer had a cow that he wanted to buy. He went over to visit the farmer and asked him about the cow's pedigree. The old farmer didn't know what pedigree meant, so we asked him about the cow's butterfat production. He told us he didn't have any idea what it was. Finally, we asked if he knew how many pounds of milk the cow produced each year. The farmer said, 'I don't know, but she's an honest cow and she'll give you all the milk she has.' Eisenhower said, 'I'm like the cow. I'll give you everything I have.'" Mephibosheth did not do or make in Hebrew his feet beard, and clothes, nor washed since the day David departed from Jerusalem, when the king was humiliated, hounded, and hunted by his beloved, boastful, and beastly son Absalom. Jonathan's son Mephibosheth came to meet David not for retribution, revenge, or redemption, or redress, nor because his servant Ziba and household of 15 sons and 20 servants, 2 Samuel 19:17, left him with all that belonged to him. He greeted the king out of compassion, concern, and conscience for the safety of David, whom his father Jonathan loved as his own soul, 1 Samuel 18:1. Previously, Mephibosheth was cheated out of his family heritage by his servant Ziba, 2 Samuel 16:4. Can you imagine the king meeting a person like Mephibosheth, whose feet, beard, and clothes were so unkempt, unsightly, untidy, unattractive, and uncivilized? His servants had left him, but he was undaunted, unflagging, and unbounded. Nobody thought Mephibosheth could make the demanding, dire, and difficult trip because he was lame, not just his right or left feet, but on both his feet, 2 Samuel 9:13. What a loving and loyal person was Mephibosheth, a trait so demonstrated by his father Jonathan to his friend David. His servant Ziba had painted him into a corner, left him high and dry, and portrayed him as a traitor, but the failure was never Mephibosheth's, but David's to blame and bear. David was the one who was desperate, deceived, and distressed. The aging and anxious king could not distinguish between foe Absalom, friend Ziba, and friend Mephibosheth. Absalom the adversary, Ziba the actor, and Mephibosheth the ally, the menacing son, the manipulative servant, and the misunderstood successor. It did not make sense for Mephibosheth to say that David's exile meant the kingdom of his father would be restored, 2 Samuel 16:3, since David's son Absalom was a cruel, clever, and calculative man bent on killing his father David. He who did not spare his father was unlikely to spare his father's rival family. There was no doubting that Mephibosheth had been in a mourning, miserable, and misgiving mood since hearing of David's troubles with his son Absalom. Mephibosheth was a genuine, gentle, good, and grateful person. Mephibosheth could have chosen to cut his nails, chop his beard, and change his clothes, but that was not his concern, even though it could have made a difference if he had shaved cleaner, smelled nicer, and showered more. The king could be less agitated, annoyed, and appalled, but Mephibosheth was just glad David survived mayhem, madness, and malice. Second, redeem the present. 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 25 to 28. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, "Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth?" He said, "My lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserved nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king?" On a sailing vessel, the mate of the ship, yielding to a temptation, became drunk. He had never before been in such a state. The captain entered in the log of the ship the record for the day, "Mate drunk today." When the mate read his entry, he implored the captain to take it out of the record, saying that when it was read by the owners of the ship, it would cost him his post, and the captain well knew that this was his first offense. But the obdurate captain refused to change the record and said to the mate, "This is the fact, and into the log it goes." Some days afterward, the mate was keeping the log, and after he had given the latitude and longitude, the run for the day, the wind, and the sea, he made this entry: "Captain sober today." The indignant captain protested when he read the record, declaring that it would leave an altogether false impression in the minds of the owners of the vessel, as if it were an unusual thing for him to be sober. But the mate answered as the captain answered him, "This is the fact, and into the log it goes." This is a good example of how, by an accuracy of statement, but by misrepresentation of circumstances, one can injure the reputation of other. David was in a foul, frosty, and forlorn mood that day, probably from the after effects of weeping, mourning, 2 Samuel 19:1, and crying, 2 Samuel 19:4, for the loss of his son Absalom early in the chapter. He directed an unfair question to Mephibosheth, crippled in both feet and accused by his servant before the exiled David previously. "Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth?" Verse 25. Why in the world would the king burden and bully a lame man to follow him is beyond understanding. To complicate and worsen matters for Mephibosheth, a man from the same family of the house of Saul by the name of Shimei, 2 Samuel 16:5-13, had cursed David without end, threw stones at him, and cast dust at David as he departed Jerusalem. David could have put two and two together and come to the conclusion that Shimei was from the same clan and was sent by Mephibosheth to despise, degrade, and denounce him. Mephibosheth, however, could not have been more humble or honest in attitude and answer. The phrase, "My Lord the King," verses 26, 27, and 28, and "My Lord, O King," was also familiar to David because it debuted in the Bible not too long ago by David in his first exile in the wilderness when he twice begged the reigning King Saul, 1 Samuel 24:8 and 26:17, Mephibosheth's grandfather, with the same words not to misunderstand him. Mephibosheth did not go with David in his exile not because he had no heart or honor, but no health or help. Not only was he lame, his 2 asses were conveniently stolen by Ziba to be given as presents to David for his ride out of Jerusalem, 2 Samuel 16, verse 1. So the crippled Mephibosheth had no means of conveyance and communication. Mephibosheth did not fully or faintly press his advantage when David asked the perfect question in Hebrew, "Why not you walk with me?" Mephibosheth was too much of a gentleman to reveal or respond that he was lame on both feet, 2 Samuel 9:13, not merely lame. Mephibosheth did not go with David for other reasons but one. He was a hindrance and a handicap, pardon the expression, to the aged king, who himself needed people living with him and looking after him. Third, respect the past. 2 Samuel 19, verse 29-30. The king said to him, "Why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land." Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely." Abraham Lincoln said, "Quarrel not at all. No man resolved to make the most of himself can spare time for personal contention. Still less can he afford to take all the consequences, including the vitiating of his temper and loss of self-control. Yield larger things to which you can show no more than equal right, and yield lesser ones, though clearly your own. Better give your path to a dog than be bitten by him in contesting for the right. Even killing the dog would not cure the bite. David came to his senses in the end and partitioned the land between Ziba and Mephibosheth, making Mephibosheth the big winner. Half of the land was given to him, which was more than what he needed or requested. The verb order, verse 29, is not in the original text. David surprisingly did not use an imperative, but a regular verb divide, verse 30, on Mephibosheth. Like his father Jonathan, the respectable, righteous, and reasonable son of Jonathan did not cry for justice, champion his cause, counter the king, contest the finding, clarify his situation, continue the argument, and cause more heartbreak. Mephibosheth was a gentle, giving, grateful, genuine, and good man. He had his father's head, heart, honor, humility, and hospitality. The word safely, verse 30, or peace, shalom, contrasted the attitude of David and Mephibosheth and compared Mephibosheth with his father Jonathan. David only cared for his son Absalom's peace, 2 Samuel 18, 29, and 32. But Mephibosheth cared for David's peace, 2 Samuel 19:24 and 30. Mephibosheth continued in the strong tradition of his father, who cared for nothing but gave up everything for David's peace or safety. In the famous episode and chapter where Jonathan and David made a covenant with each other, the word peace appears 4 times, 3 times from the mouth of Jonathan and 1 from David. 1 Samuel 20, verse 7, 13, 21, and 42. Conclusion. It is always better to hold out hope than to hold a grudge, to help a person than to humiliate a person, heal a wound than to harden one's heart. As much as possible, we must check the facts and clear the air, not create a scene or come to blows. Do you have the courage to confess and correct your wrongs or weaknesses? Do you act or react impulsively, irritably, or intolerantly towards others when you are discouraged or disappointed? Bible study questions. 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, chapter 9, verse 9 to 11, chapter 16, verse 1 to 4, and chapter 19, verses 24 to 30. Background. Who was Mephibosheth? 4, verse 4. What was his relationship with David? 9, verse 9 to 11. Who was Ziba? What was his relationship with Mephibosheth? What command did David give Mephibosheth? What promise was Ziba given? 2. What did Ziba bring to meet David? How important were these provisions? Was his motive to help David, or was there another motive? 16 verses 1 to 4. 3. Why did David trust Ziba so easily? 16 verse 1 to 4. What kind of situation did David face? Would this affect his decision? Was his decision fair? 4. How did Mephibosheth wait for David's return? Chapter 19 verse 24. 5. When David asked why Mephibosheth did not go with him, what response did Mephibosheth have? 19 verses 26 to 28. Was he loyal to David? 6. Did David accept Mephibosheth's explanation after listening to it? 19 verse 29 to 30. 7. Why did David divide the land equally between Mephibosheth and Ziba? Why did Mephibosheth readily accept it? 19 verses 29 to 30. 8. Discussion topic. Divide into 3 groups representing David, Mephibosheth, and Ziba, respectively, and state the following positions. Perception of the other two. disposal of Saul's belongings, loyalty to people, trust in people, what is fair to yourself, others. Group sharing. 1. In the workplace, what risks do people face when they slander others for their own benefit? 2. In the marketplace, what should you do when you are slandered by others? Have you been wronged? 3. In the workplace, how should we objectively evaluate the opinions of different people, analyze conflicts of interest, recognize slander, and pursue fairness? 4. In church ministry, what kind of conflict of interest would lead to mutual slander? How can we avoid these sins? 5. How has this lesson helped you as a disciple of Christ to understand your role, identity, participation, influence, and relationship with others in the marketplace? Personal application. 1. Have you been slandered in the workplace? Has anyone profited from hurting you? How do you protect yourself? Is there a chance to defend yourself? What does God teach you about these things? How do you trust God in these situations? 2. In the workplace, have you felt uncomfortable that others have reaped the benefits from your hard work? Do you fight for yourself? What has God taught you? How do you trust God in these situations? 3. As a fair person in the workplace, how do you distribute material benefits?